Hello, welcome back to Atlas Within. I'm Andres. Today we're going to be talking about the different types of resistances you can have or utilize when doing a strength training session. So just to give you the list, we're going to be running through bodyweight, bands, dumbbell, barbell, and machines. And essentially what's the positive side of each one of those and the negative side of each. So pros and cons. So to kick things off, we'll begin with bodyweight exercises. They're pretty standard, no equipment involved, you just do it with your own weight. They're very easy to do, or at least very easy to set up, because you're not having to find equipment and whatnot, unless you're doing, for example, maybe pull-ups, dips, but even those you can probably find alternatives that do a very similar movement. It's a great exercise, and I think it's fantastic for anyone beginning any exercise routine, even if you're returning. For example, it's my go-to for whenever I'm starting a new routine, but I've taken a break for quite a long time. I will do body weight because my strength is obviously not going to be where it normally is, depending on where I left it and how long it's been since my last training session. So it's just really good, kind of on the joints, because obviously you're just doing your own body weight. Now obviously if you are a complete beginner and potentially maybe your own body weight is a lot for you to handle, there are variations you can do to many exercises to make it easier. But yeah, long story short, they're pretty darn good to begin with, very easy to set up because it's just your own weight, with the exception of a few exercises that would benefit, like a pull-up bar and dips, as I mentioned. But otherwise, most of the exercises you can just do as long as you have a nice clear space around you and you can freely move your arms and legs around as needed. The downside, of course, is the same notion that, of course, you're working with your own body weight. So that is the limiting factor in how much resistance you can work with. Because at the end of the day, unless you increase in weight, which I'm guessing might not be what a lot of people want to do, they tend to want to lose weight, it's very likely you'll hit essentially a bottleneck where you won't be able to progress any further. Now, having said that, if you think about, for example, calisthenics, people that do that, that's all body weight. And essentially what those people have done is they've mastered being able to move their body in different planes of motion, in different angles. So there's obviously other areas you could go into if that was something you wanted to continue with and you wanted to stick with body weight only. But if you were looking for essentially more strength training, just being able to move heavier objects essentially, then unfortunately bodyweight exercises will have a ceiling that you won't be able to unfortunately break through unless you move on to the other types of equipment. So we'll move on to bands, resistant bands specifically. They're great, so they're fantastic because they're very portable. You can keep them in a bag. Essentially, I have my own set, which I carry with me if I need to, but otherwise I just have ready to use, very easy to set up. You need, for the most part, an anchor point, so a door. I think most people can probably find a door. And even if not, there are exercises you can do without having to use an anchor point or an external one. You can use your legs, for example, or you can use your back. You could even use, depending on the plane of motion you want to do, for example, if you have a band in front of you, you can pull it apart towards your sides and kind of do like a reverse fly, and it works your back. And you know, that's all within your capabilities. You don't have to have any other equipment besides the bands and of course enough space to move into. So really good from that perspective. The downsides, or the cons to that, to using bands, are that once again there's a bit of a bottleneck in terms of how much resistance you can use. You can put more and more bands on, but it doesn't work or feel as comfortable as doing weights, for example. And that's just because of the way resistant bands work and how their resistance changes throughout the movement. Because if you think about it, when they are not expanded, when they're obviously in their stable state, they will have the least resistance because they're not being pulled apart. But as soon as you start pulling them further and further apart, there's more resistance to the band, and it increases exponentially, essentially, as you do the movements. So the resistance curve is a bit odd. It's not constant. It increases, decreases depending on where you are in the motion, which isn't sometimes the most ideal if you want to just have the same force or the same weight throughout the entire motion. Now, there are caveats to that statement, because obviously even with weights, there are points when you're moving a weight that things will be slightly easier because of the position you're in. But going back to bands, that's the limiting factor of it. So it's the fact that there is a bit of a bottleneck in how much resistance you can use, but also the resistance curve is varied. It's not constant. So not the best, but very versatile. I think they're still very good to have as part of your workout equipment. Like I said, very easy to do. Beginners, I think they're very beginner friendly because of course you can start very low, very easy to set up. And I would say a bit more kinder on the joints as well, because the forces applied aren't as tough, shall we say, when you're using weights, because obviously that's sometimes over your head or in a position that's not ideal if you need to come out of them. At least with the bands you can just let go and off they fly. But yeah, I digress. That's essentially the kind of downside to them. But overall, I would say they're still pretty good to have, and I personally use them. I'm personally using them right now with my routine. I'm only using bodyweight and bands, so there you go. And that's, still giving me quite good progress, quite good gains, I would say, as well. But those are bands. Moving on to dumbbells. Dumbbells are fantastic because they allow you to train unilaterally. So what that means is you are training one side at a time, even though you might not be. So to put it into perspective, to give you an example, if you're doing a dumbbell chest press, you are potentially doing the same movement with both arms, but because they're working independently, you can actually gauge to see if one arm or one side of your chest or arm is weaker than the other. And it's really good because you can fine tune, you can tweak, and you can adjust weights, and it's just a really good way to test out your strength and, like I said, kind of identify any weaknesses that you might have. The other part of it that feeds into that is that you also get a bit more range of motion because you are free to move those arms in different planes, and in a plane that's maybe even more comfortable for you. Because let's say you've got shoulder problems and you're doing a bench press with, say, normally a barbell, in certain positions you might find that uncomfortable. But with dumbbells, you can obviously tweak it, you can change the angle, you can have it slightly with the elbows slightly inwards, and then bring them down, take them up, and it's just a bit more comfortable because it's a bit more neutral, shall we say. So dumbbells, yeah, very good for that type of training and that type of focus and identifying, like I said, weaknesses that you might have. The cons to it comes down to the weight, I would say, in terms of how much weight you can put on it, because they aren't the easiest to get a lot of weight onto. There will be essentially a tipping point where you just can't physically fit any more weight onto one dumbbell, unless you go to a gym or a place that has, I don't know, 100-pound dumbbell already there, which I'm not sure, or as far as I know, isn't very common. I think probably 50 pounds, no, maybe 60 pounds, 70 maybe. I'm not too familiar with a lot of gyms, to be honest, just because I tend to work out at home, which I'm doing at the moment. I did work out at a gym recently, and I do think they had quite a high number, but I'm thinking about 60 pounds, 70 pounds. So in kilograms, that's probably 35 kilos, which isn't too bad. But once again, it's a bottleneck, because if you have 35 kilos of one, 35 kilos of another, 70 kilos, and you want to become the newest person to set a personal record in bench press, 70 kilos isn't going to cut it. You're going to have to move on to something a bit better. equipped to deal with that or to gain that strength. Which brings me on to barbells. Barbells are fantastic for those types of lifts for ultimate strength because you can really load the barbell. Yeah, all the great lifts, all the big lifts rely on a barbell. So I'm thinking about the top three: deadlifts, squats, bench press, all barbells, because you can just load them. So that's the biggest positive of it, and I would say that's the main attribute to why you would use a barbell. It also means that if you do have weaknesses, stay on one side and the other, you don't feel them as much because the other side will likely just compensate for it and allow you to push ever so much more. You'll be able to do more weight. The downside is that you do need to be very careful about your technique when you're doing this, because if you are doing heavier lifts, more weight always comes with more risk. So you have to be careful of how you move that weight. You have to build up to be able to move it effectively, efficiently, and avoid injury as much as possible. Going back to a previous point I mentioned, you are locked into a position of how you can do the lifts with a barbell. You don't have the free range of motion if you wanted to change things up with a barbell. Let's say you're doing a deadlift, then you just find it a bit uncomfortable to lean forward, bring up the bar, close to your knees, having that full anchor, kind of lean forward position. They do have other alternatives like a trap bar, but then again, that's a different type of equipment. It's not a barbell. And that emphasizes the point that, you can find alternatives, but it means that barbells unfortunately lock you into some positions that, as long as you have the technique and you've built up the strength to do those lifts, you should be okay. But if it is uncomfortable, even borderline painful, then you might seek alternatives way to do it. Even, for example, doing arm workouts, you can do a barbell curl. But, personally, I've had it in years before where I much prefer to use an easy bar just because the angle of when I do the curl is much nicer for my wrists because I don't have the flexibility there. So that is, I would say, the downside of barbells. And then last but not least, machines. So machines are fantastic from the perspective that you can really isolate the muscle because they remove any other fatigue you might get whilst doing an exercise in a different type of position or using different equipment. So as an example, if you're doing a chest press on a machine, you are usually sitting down, your back's against the backrest, your legs are stable, and all you're doing is moving your arms and pushing out to activate the chest. Great, that's exactly what you want to be doing. If you were doing this, let's say using a barbell, you'd be on a bench, still lying down, but you would have a level of core engagement you'd have to have, and then your legs would also have to have some sort of stability so you're not moving side to side. And even though that might seem little and you probably feel like you don't do it, there is stability that needs to be done when you're doing these movements using free weights, which is what barbells and dumbbells would be classified as. So machines remove all that. Another very good example that I've personally noticed the difference is if I'm doing a barbell bent over a row. If you've ever done a bent over row, obviously you're in a position where you're slightly bent over at 45 degrees, barbell's below you, you bring it up to your sides, squeeze. It feels great for your back, at least the upper back, but the lower back really feels it. It takes a toll off the certain amount of reps. And it unfortunately means that you might have to bail out of doing more reps for your back just because your lower back is just not able to handle the load in that position. Whereas if you're doing a sitting down row on a machine, and this goes for cable machines as well. So we're looking at cable and then plate loaded machines. In those positions, none of that happens. The fatigue to your back is purely in the movement you do. So whatever fatigue you get just from pulling a weight to hit your lats and obviously your arms to an extent, that is all that you're going to be feeling, and that's obviously the main benefit of it, because you won't have the fatigue building up from other exercises to stop you from doing or achieving even more reps or higher weight in those exercises when using machines. Now, the downside to machines is, well, funny enough, the downside is linked to the fact that you are in this position and you are only exercising the specific muscles that you intend to do. So it's really good for isolation, but it does mean that you miss out on, once again, stability or building other muscles that would normally do if you did them using other equipment, which isn't necessarily a bad thing. It just means that you are trading strength, hypertrophy potentially, for more full-rounded strength and development in the body, which, like I said, it's not necessarily a bad thing, but it is a bit of a con because you do miss out on things. And if you are exercising because you want to be more mobile, you want to be stronger, you want to be just able to do things in everyday life, be prepared for unexpected situations, then you do want your body to be able to react and deal with certain positions that, you know, require stability, require strength, can be prone to fatigue, but if you've trained it well, you can obviously resist that. You'll miss out on those things if you're doing machines. So that's a bit of a shame from that perspective. The other downside is machines tend to be even harder to come by in terms of having it at home gym. Now, if you have the space for it and you can get these obviously machines, fantastic, great news. But if you don't have space or you don't have a home gym, you are reliant on obviously going to an actual gym to do the exercises on those machines, which, you know, for some people that might be fine. You know, happy to go to the gym to do any exercises, including using the machines or free weights or body weight, whatever it might be. But then others, if you're not so keen on going to the gym, there is a bit of a limitation to how much you can have at home. You can probably buy the all-in-one cable machines and they'll be quite good, but you won't get the benefit of all the individual machines that exist out there. So yeah, it just depends, I think, on what your goal is in terms of, you know, why you're using machines and whether or not you can do that with an alternative, or you really need a machine to help you kind of achieve that goal, or essentially get to the next level of strength that you're trying to achieve by doing exercises. So yeah, it really depends, I think, on personal preference in that sense. And I believe that is all of them. So yeah, those are all the types of resistances you can have, at least the most common ones, I would say, in terms of categories. Obviously, I mentioned in some of those there are alternatives that you can use, so trap bars being that one of them for deadlifts. There are other equipment like medicine balls that you can use that offer other types of resistances and other movements. There are many things you can chuck in there and mix and match, essentially. But in a whole, those are the types of resistances you can use to build just stable strength, ongoing strength on a day-to-day basis. And it really comes down to what it is you want to do and where you're at in your journey. Because like I said, if you are a beginner, then bodyweight/bands, I think is a great place to start. If you're a bit more advanced, then having dumbbells, barbells, fantastic. And then if you really, really want to fine-tune certain movements, certain lifts, certain strength, especially if you want to develop muscle, then machines really help in that respect to isolate, like I said, those movements, those muscles. So it really depends on personal preference as to what you want to do. Those are the pros and cons to each one. None of them are the go-to, I would say, by themselves. It's really a case of mixing and matching. You probably have a preference, and if obviously that's what you want to do, then use it. I mean, you may miss out on certain things, but if you're conscious of that, if you're aware of it, and you are happy to that be the case, then so be it. then just do whatever you want to do, whether it's bodyweight, whether it's bands, dumbbells, barbells, or machines by themselves. It's up to you. Hopefully this has given you a bit more of an insight, a bit more of an in-depth understanding to an extent. Obviously there's more factors that feed into all of these different types of equipment that you can use. But that's high level, gives you an idea where you want to put it in your own routine, when you might want to switch things around. And then, yeah, hopefully make the best choices to just keep progressing, keep achieving those goals, keep seeing strength gains, muscle gain, flexibility, whatever it might be, because that's another thing of resistant bands, flexibility. They can help you out with that, obviously, to move in certain ways that you would otherwise not do with other equipment. But yeah, thanks for watching. Hopefully catch you in the next one, and have a good one. All right, bye.